Morning heat pressed low against the savanna, flattening the grass and dulling distant sounds. At the edge of a shallow rise, a lion cub lay apart from everything that should have been familiar. His body was curled inward, legs drawn close, tail slack against the dust. Each breath arrived late, shallow, lifting his ribs unevenly before falling away again. The space around him felt paused, as if the land itself were waiting to see whether he would rise. Flies found him first. They hovered and settled along the damp edges of his nose and eyes, tracing small movements he no longer bothered to shake away. A rasping sound slipped from his throat, thin and unfinished, not loud enough to travel far. It was not a call meant to summon strength, only a reflex of air passing through a tired body. Beyond the rise, the pride had already moved on, their low sounds absorbed by distance and grass. The cub did not show the marks of violence. There were no punctures, no torn hide, no stiffness that comes after sudden injury. His coat was dusty but intact, the soft fur along his neck flattened by repeated attempts to rest and stand again. Exhaustion clung to him in the way his head sagged forward, the way his ears twitched without lifting. Hunger and heat had worked slowly, quietly, wearing him down without spectacle. From far off, the savanna carried its usual rhythms. Insects hummed close to the ground. A breeze shifted seed heads and bent the taller grass in shallow waves. Those movements drew the attention of a patrol vehicle easing along a distant track, its presence already part of the landscape to the animals that lived there. The rangers did not stop at first. They watched patterns, counted shapes, followed what was missing rather than what was present. What caught their attention was the stillness. Cubs did not linger alone in open ground, not at this age, not without reason. Through binoculars, the small rise resolved into a single shape that did not change position as minutes passed. When the cub lifted his head, it wavered, then dropped again. Flies lifted and resettled. The faint sound reached them then, carried briefly on the wind before dissolving. They slowed, keeping distance, letting the vehicle idle far back. No one rushed forward. The approach was measured, angled so as not to startle or signal threat. One ranger stepped down and paused, scanning the horizon for movement from the pride, for any sign that a watchful female might return. None came. The cub remained where he was, breathing unevenly, eyes half open but unfocused. Up close the signs were clearer. His sides fluttered with effort. Saliva darkened the fur beneath his mouth. When a shadow crossed him, he flinched weakly, gathering his legs as if to stand, then sinking again into the grass. A hand hovered near him without touching, offering space more than help. A quiet voice broke the air once, low and steady, "Easy now." The cub's breathing stuttered, then settled back into its shallow rhythm. He did not try to flee. He did not have the strength. What remained was a fragile balance between holding on and letting go, played out in small movements of chest and whisker. Around them, the grass whispered as the wind passed through, and somewhere far off, the pride continued on, unaware, while the sun climbed higher, indifferent and bright. The hours stretched forward without mercy, the sun climbing until the air itself seemed to press down on the ground. Heat pooled around the cub's small body, settling into his fur and slowing everything that remained of him. He shifted only when the grass beneath his chest grew too warm, lifting his head briefly before letting it sink again. His breathing stayed shallow, each rise of his ribs a quiet effort that did not grow easier with time. Distant roars rolled across the savanna in low waves, carried by wind and space. When they reached him, his ears twitched and lifted partway, turning toward the sound with a fragile precision. His head followed, trembling as it rose. For a moment, his body seemed to gather itself, as if the sound alone might pull strength back into his limbs. Then the roar faded, moving on without slowing, without answering him. His head lowered again, resting against the grass, eyes blinking slowly as if weighed down by dust and light. Several times through the day he tried to stand. His front legs pushed first, paws digging into the dry earth, claws catching briefly before slipping. His shoulders rose, unsteady, muscles quivering beneath his skin. The effort sent a shiver through his body, visible in the way his spine tightened. His back legs followed too late, folding instead of lifting. Each attempt ended the same way, with his chest dropping back into the grass and a faint sound leaving him, more breath than voice. Afterward, he stayed still longer each time, conserving what little remained. The grass around him shifted with insects and passing wind, brushing against his face and sides. He flicked an ear now and then, slow and deliberate, responding to sensations he could no longer ignore. Flies returned persistently, tracing the edges of his eyes and nose. When one lingered too long, his tail gave a weak twitch, stirring dust but failing to drive them away. His body seemed caught between awareness and rest, never fully sinking into either. From a distance, the observers remained quiet. They adjusted their positions as the sun moved, careful not to cast shadows that might alarm him. Their attention rested on details most would miss: the timing of his breaths, the way his ears still tracked sound, the small tightening of his jaw when something passed too close. These signs suggested he was not gone inward yet. He was still listening, still registering the world around him. Once, when a vehicle shifted slightly against the track, the cub lifted his head again. His eyes opened wider, focusing briefly before softening. His ears angled forward, then flattened, uncertain. A low whimper slipped from him, thin and unformed, barely rising above the sound of grass moving in the breeze. It faded quickly, costing him more effort than it gave back. A ranger's voice answered without approach, quiet and steady, "You're not alone." The cub did not react outwardly to the sound, but his breathing steadied for a few moments afterward. His head remained lifted, neck muscles trembling as he held it there. The sun glinted off his eyes, revealing their dullness, the strain behind them. When he finally lowered his head again, it was with care, as though even gravity required negotiation. As the day wore on, shadows shortened and then began their slow return. The heat eased only slightly, but the air shifted, carrying new scents across the grass. Somewhere far off, hooves moved and birds lifted in small groups. The cub lay still, chest rising and falling, ears flicking now and then at distant life continuing beyond his reach. The savanna breathed around him, wide and indifferent, while the light softened just enough to suggest that time, at least, was still moving. As the light began to thin and the heat loosened its hold, the distance between the cub and the waiting humans slowly closed. They approached without urgency, each step placed carefully, allowing the grass to move ahead of them as warning. Their voices stayed low, barely lifting above the sound of wind brushing the savanna. The cub saw them early, his eyes tracking the unfamiliar shapes as they came into clearer focus. He did not try to rise. His head lifted just enough to follow their movement. The effort made his neck tremble, but he held it, ears angled forward in quiet attention. There was no growl, no attempt at threat. Only a faint tightening along his shoulders, the reflex of caution that had not yet left him. When they stopped several body lengths away, he remained still, watching, breathing shallowly through parted jaws. They waited before moving closer, giving him time to register their presence without pressure. One figure lowered to a knee, making their shape smaller against the grass. Another circled slightly, careful to stay within his line of sight. Nothing sudden broke the rhythm of the moment. A single voice moved through the air, calm and even, "It's all right." The cub's response was minimal but present. His ears flicked, then settled again. A soft sound left his throat, breath passing over dry vocal cords, unfinished and weak. His eyes stayed open, dull with fatigue but alert enough to follow hands as they slowly reached toward him. When a shadow crossed his body, he flinched faintly, then relaxed again when nothing followed. Up close, the signs became unmistakable. His gums were pale, tacky with dryness. The skin along his flank did not spring back quickly when touched, holding its shape a moment too long. Dehydration had taken more than just strength. It had dulled his responses, slowed his ability to regulate even the smallest movements. His body was warm to the touch, heat trapped beneath fur that no longer lifted with ease. They examined him without turning him fully, respecting how little energy he had left. Along his hind leg, partly hidden beneath dust and fur, they found the source. A small wound, no larger than a claw mark, had darkened and swollen. The skin around it was tight, radiating warmth. It was not the mark of a fight, not the clean tear of teeth, but something minor that had gone unnoticed, then unattended. Over days, infection had taken hold, working quietly while the pride moved on. The cub did not pull away when they touched the area. His body tensed briefly, then softened, as if resistance required more effort than he could spare. His eyes shifted from face to face, following movement with a slow deliberation. When one hand rested lightly against his shoulder, he leaned into the grass rather than away from it, accepting contact without understanding it. Another soft sound escaped him, breath catching slightly before evening out again. His sides fluttered, then settled. A ranger brushed flies away from his face with a slow, practiced motion, careful not to startle him. "Easy," came the quiet reassurance, almost lost to the wind. Around them, the savanna continued its subtle movements. Grass bent and straightened. A bird called once, then fell silent. The cub's tail twitched weakly, stirring dust near his hind legs. He blinked slowly, eyes lingering open between blinks as if sleep hovered close but never fully arrived. As they prepared to lift him, hands sliding beneath his small body with deliberate care, he did not struggle. His head rested briefly against a forearm, the weight of it surprising in its trust. His breathing stayed shallow but steady, and his eyes remained open, watching the horizon beyond them as the light softened further. The day edged toward evening, shadows stretching long across the grass. The cub was carried carefully away from the place he had lain all day, leaving behind flattened blades and a faint impression in the dust. The wind moved through the empty space he left, erasing his outline as the sky shifted toward dusk. The cub lay quietly now, wrapped gently in a soft blanket of cloth as the humans worked with careful, measured movements. Fluids were administered slowly, the cool liquid easing into his body as his shallow breathing began to lengthen and deepen. His small chest rose and fell with less effort, the faint rasping sound fading into a steadier rhythm. Sunlight leaned low across the savanna, long and amber, filtering through heat waves that shimmered over the grass, softening the edges of everything. From a distance, the observers noticed movement along the horizon. Shapes emerged slowly, stretching and shifting against the wavering light. Lions, the cub's pride, had begun to return. The wind carried the scent of their family, the faint trace of their presence mingling with dust and dry grass. They moved deliberately, pausing to sniff the air, heads low, ears alert. Their bodies were tense, muscles coiled beneath tawny fur, cautious as they neared the humans. The mother remained slightly apart from the group, her form silhouetted against the sunlit plain. She did not approach immediately, choosing instead to stand still, every nerve alert. Her eyes followed the human's hands and movements, calculating and patient. Her tail flicked occasionally, a subtle sign of tension. Yet she did not step closer, nor did she give way to panic. Her stance was measured, controlled, a careful watch over her young. Even in separation, she communicated presence and protection, a silent promise that the cub's vulnerability had not gone unnoticed. The cub lifted his head weakly at the sight of her, his eyes catching hers across the stretch of grass. The recognition was slow but undeniable, a flicker of connection that ran through both of them. He blinked, small muscles in his jaw and neck trembling, but he did not struggle or panic. The mother's gaze softened only fractionally, just enough to convey awareness and reassurance without compromising her instinctual caution. Her body remained rigid but patient, her presence a quiet anchor in a world that had felt unstable and uncertain. Closer now, the other lions fanned out, scanning the area. A young male sniffed at the edge of the clearing, ears forward, tail low, sensing the change in scent and movement. A female lingered near the mother, her gaze sweeping over the humans and the cub in turn. The pride did not advance carelessly. Each step was measured, deliberate, reflecting the complex awareness of risk and the careful balancing of trust and protection. The humans continued their work without interruption, keeping hands gentle, movements slow. Fluids were topped up, wounds examined and cleaned, and the cub's breathing was monitored. His eyes followed the mother, then the surrounding pride, then settled slowly as the warmth of attention, both human and animal, grounded him. When a soft voice cut through the hum of wind and distant rustle, it was gentle, barely carrying, almost there. The cub's ears twitched, acknowledging the sound, yet his focus remained on the distant lion watching, a tether stronger than the touch of any hand. Moments stretched, a rhythm of quiet, the heat of the day fading into a gentler light. Dust motes drifted lazily through sunbeams, the savanna exhaling in low, steady pulses. The cub's mother did not move, but her presence radiated assurance. The cub remained small and fragile, but he was no longer alone. The pride had returned, surrounding him with awareness, patience, and the unspoken code of family. As evening light softened across the grass, the mother finally shifted slightly, a cautious step closer, though still maintaining respectful distance. Her gaze did not waver from the cub, who rested against the human support, steady now and breathing more confidently. Around them, the savanna exhaled with wind brushing the long grass, a subtle song of watchfulness and presence, leaving the scene imbued with a quiet, unwavering promise. He had been found and he was not forgotten. The cub's small body rested briefly against the soft ground, a final pause after the long day of care and attention. The humans slowly withdrew, hands leaving only the faint warmth of their presence. Each movement was careful, deliberate, measured so as not to startle or rush him. For a moment he stayed still, chest rising and falling evenly, tail flicking lazily through dust. His eyes lingered on the shadows of the figures retreating, tracking them as they stepped back and let the space between them grow. Then, with an effort that was visible in every muscle, he lifted his head. His legs wobbled under him, front paws spreading for balance while his back legs quivered, uncertain of their strength. Each movement was tentative, deliberate, as if testing whether the body he had relied on for months of instinct and survival would still respond. Dust rose in faint clouds around his paws, settling as he shifted, then lifted again, drawing more of himself upright. The cub's ears twitched, scanning the horizon. The pride waited, gathered in quiet clusters near the tall grass, muscles relaxed but attentive. The mother's form remained closest, eyes tracking his every movement with a patient intensity that never intruded, never rushed. The other lions shifted slightly, a low rumble of reassurance in their throats, subtle but enough to anchor him. He took a slow, trembling step forward, then another, chest rising with effort and determination. With each movement, he grew steadier, the tremor in his legs lessening as the strength he had saved through hours of stillness returned. His tail flicked once, then twice, brushing the grass, marking progress. His gaze lifted toward the mother, who remained motionless but radiated a presence that guided him. The cub's nose twitched as sense reached him, mingling familiarity with cautious recognition. He paused only briefly, then resumed, ears forward, body taut with focus, every step a small triumph. The humans remained at a respectful distance, silent witnesses to the quiet reunion. One soft word passed, almost a whisper to the wind, "That's it." It was not encouragement so much as acknowledgement, a quiet mark of connection between species, an understanding that the effort to help had reached its conclusion. The cub responded with no sound, only the steady rhythm of his breathing and the tentative sway of his legs as he moved into the embrace of his family. When he reached the edge of the waiting pride, the mother leaned slightly forward, then back, a subtle signal that no harm would come. The cub pressed into the space between her and the others, shoulders brushing against warm fur, tail curling briefly around the hind leg of a sibling. The group shifted together, a flowing motion that erased the distance of hours, their bodies moving as one. Slowly, deliberately, they disappeared into the tall grass, shapes blending with the golden waves, until only the gentle rustle remained, marking the path they had taken. The savanna returned to its quiet rhythm, the air stilling and the dust settling over flattened blades. Insects hummed faintly. A breeze stirred the grasses, carrying with it the lingering scent of life renewed, of survival affirmed. The humans watched for a long moment, hearts steady but filled with the weight of the day's events, tracking the faintest hints of movement before finally turning away. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, shadows stretching long and soft, the impression of the cub's journey remained etched in memory, the struggle, the care, the cautious steps back to family. The light filtered through the waving grasses, golden and gentle, and in that quiet space, a fragile life had been restored. The footprints left behind slowly faded into dust, but the story lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, carried far beyond the savanna into memory, a quiet promise of endurance and hope.